Hey everyone, this is Bo. In this video, I set out to build two of these beautiful coffee tables. They are 52 inches long, 26 inches wide, and 18 inches high. Two unique things about these coffee tables is that they have this beautiful quarter sawn oak top, and as well, they are designed in such a way that they can be disassembled and packed or transported in a very small and compact fashion. So stay tuned and see how I accomplish that. So after all of the milling, laminating, milling again, I'm at a point where I'm starting to see some of the parts from the table kind of come to life and take form. So behind me, what I have is one of the tabletops for the coffee tables. You know, all this started out as pretty wide lumber. So I had three wide boards that made up this top, and I had to rip them down in width so I could joint them. And so I've pieced that all back together. I have then jointed one edge of each of these individual boards, and you have to make sure that you joint the two edges that touch each other on the original board. So I made myself a little legend down here of which edges touched, and so I've quickly straightened them, and then I've ripped each of the individual boards to width, and for each board I set the fence to maximize each board itself. They weren't all consistent cuts. One was 5 3/8, one was 5 7/8, one was 4 1/2, whatever. So next up, I laid this out so it looks visually appealing to me, and then I marked it with a carpenter's triangle, and then I've marked I and O and I and O and I and O on each one of these boards. So this has an O here and I here, and then this adjoining board has an O and an I. So when I fine tune the edges, I know what side to put against my fence. So if there's any little bit of angle error on my fence to my joiner blades, that's taken care of by alternating which face is against the fence and canceling that out, so I don't end up with either a potato chip after it's all glued up, or I don't end up with a gap in one of the joints. Also, I have some of the blanks here for what's going to be the top and bottom of the leg, as well as the vertical pieces. 6/4 ash has been laminated. I milled all this lumber first as individual pieces, and then I glued it all up, and then I milled it once again. So I got one surface and one edge milled up. I have to surface these again, thickness plane these, I should say, and then rip them to width. Next up, we're going to fine tune the joints on this tabletop and glue it up. So I've gotten all of the pieces cut to their length that are going to make up the two the side structures of the table. And essentially what that's going to be is a lower, I'll call it a foot, an upper section that'll support the table, and then two vertical pieces that go in between them. They're going to be joined by large mortise and tenons in both ends here. And so I've been laying out the joinery by first starting just visually getting a feel for how far I wanted these vertical supports separated from each other and what type of gap I want in the middle. So just visually kind of eyeballing it. I had a plan here and I basically followed what I liked in the plan, so it worked out good. And so now what I'm doing is I'm laying out where the mortises are going to go on the foot and the top foot, whatever you want to call it, the table foot. So after roughly getting where these are at, I know that they are 6 3/8 from each end. So I've been marking that on each one of the upper and lower pieces. I then went in and I figured out how big of a mortise I wanted based on my stock. What you can see here is it's a pretty hefty mortise. It's almost 3 inches long. It's going to be 1 1/4 inches thick, and then it's going to go up 1.5 inches up each vertical piece. And so I marked out those same lines here on the outside of the vertical piece. I'm actually using that to transfer my marks to the upper and lower, the foot and the top here. So I've got my mark at 6 3/8. I line up my vertical piece with that, and I just strike a line down, mark that one, mark that one, get this one out of here. This is kind of like my master layout piece, so I'm just using that everywhere. Mark that, mark that. So now that I got my marks on the face here, I can transfer them to the top. And then my square is still set to the exact distance, the offset distance from the edge of my mortise. I should say from the shoulder to the edge of my workpiece. So I'm going to use my same square setting to mark the line across here. So here you can see my mortise layouts. And so I'm going to initially drill a lot of these out with the Forstner bit and then come back, I think, with the router and get the shoulders nice and consistent and perpendicular. So I was able to get all the mortises cut into the feet and then the top table support. Kind of see them here. As you saw in the video, used a combination of a Forstner bit to remove a majority of the material, and then I've got a big 1/2 inch diameter spiral bit. I call it Captain Scary, and then my sub plate with some adjustable fences to ride the two pieces, the two sides of the material, so you can't move in either direction as I'm routing. Next up, I'm going to be moving on to the tenons for the vertical pieces. I'll start by cutting the shoulders on the table saw. I just got a standard rip blade in there. I'll cut them on the table saw. I'll then move to the bandsaw and remove a bulk of the waste from the bandsaw. It's real quick, easy, simple. And then finally, I will cut the cheeks on the router table. I know it seems like a lot of machines to use to do this process, where I could just use the table saw on a dado stack. But I find the router table with the router lift has really fine adjustment, and so I'm able to really dial in the cheek-to-cheek dimension, so I get a nice tight fit in the mortises I made. Let's go get them. Let's go get them. Yep. So after getting the cheeks dialed in on the router table, I then started hand fitting all the tenons into their respective mortises. And I didn't film any of this because frankly my body and my hands are always in the way of what I'm doing. But essentially, lock in the leg vise, take a block plane and chamfer the top edges of the tenon, and then I take a chisel and I chamfer all the corners of where the shoulders meet, or I'm sorry, not the shoulders, where the cheeks meet the back of the head, the front of the head, if you think of it as a face. And then I would take a file and round this because my mortises are round. And then I would use a shoulder plane to sneak up on the right thickness of the tenon. Then once I was happy with the fit, I would mark it. You can see there's a it's probably hard to see, but there's a 10 on here, and then that just goes into this guy right here. There we go. The next step here for the coffee table is to be putting in the stretchers that go from each leg assembly. And these stretchers are going to be, I'm going to cut dovetails in the end of them, and then of course the mating socket here on the leg assemblies. But instead of gluing them in, I'm actually going to use a threaded insert in the leg assembly, and then a counterbore bolt up here, because once again, I want to be able to take this thing apart and make it easy to transport. So that's kind of this is the mechanics of it, right? Is how to make this thing so you can take it apart, transport it, put it back together, and make sure it's nice and rigid. So that dovetail, with its kind of splayed joinery, really helps prevent any type of racking motion or outward play, because the dovetail locks into place. And then as well, the bolt keeps it nice and tight and compressed down so nothing can lift up. So I'm going to get to measuring how far I want the leg assemblies apart from each other, and then kind of work backwards to how big the dovetails can be and where they're going to nest inside the leg assemblies. So here we go. So I was able to get the dovetails and the stretchers cut. I ended up using my bandsaw and this little jig that took me about 10 minutes to make or so. And it's pretty straightforward. I used my bevel gauge setting I had from when I laid out my dovetail and marked that on a piece of MDF here and extended that line, and then I cut that line on my table saw, and then I cut two perpendicular cuts. I made two perpendicular cuts to that initial cut, and that created this little jig here. So here's my original factory surface. Here was the angled cut that I made, and then here are the two perpendicular cuts to that initial cut. And so what I can do then is I screwed on a little stop to the front. I put my board up against this as a second reference. Got my side and my front, and then I can push it through the bandsaw against the fence. This rides against the fence, and that allows me to cut that same angle. From there, I then cut the shoulders on the bandsaw, and then I also cut I don't know, I'm not an expert in dovetails, but I do like to cut this little, what would you call that? Shoulder? Another shoulder? Maybe? Sure. This little shoulder on the bottom here, so I cut up this whole chunk of the dovetail off. And what that really, I mean, I like it because it allows me when I'm laying this out to cut the recesses for the dovetail. I have a reference of how far that dovetail is going to go into the piece. So really then this angle, the dimension from here down to here is really the critical one for me. And so that dictates how far my leg assemblies are from one another. There. And so now that I got that in place and got them located left to right like I want to, I've clamped them down. And next up I'm going to use a knife and knife my lines and then fill them with a pencil. And I'll mark which dovetail is where, because they're going to be kind of custom fit for each one. And then I'll use my router, which I have here. And I'll route out the material and then use a chisel to get pair it back to my line. So here we go. So this is a very fitting end for video 1 of this 2-video build series. Please like the video, subscribe so you don't miss the next video release, and always, thanks for watching. Since it's got that nice kind of what the hell is the word I'm looking for? The thing that makes dovetails good. I don't know. It's too early in the morning to be thinking. Damn it. Try that again.